everybody, and welcome to another live show here on Shannon Davis Show on YouTube. If you're listening just audio, that's Omega Man Radio Network. And welcome to Season 15. Today is Wednesday, July 9th, 2025, and we're excited to be back with author and cutting-edge researcher Jeff Nyquist. Jeff, welcome back, my brother.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you brought something to drink because I'll be drinking a little bit of coffee here.
I got water. It's too late here for coffee.
And water. Well, you know, I went cold turkey for about 5 or 6 months and was just drinking, a little bit of tea, if anything, but mainly water. But I said, God, I need an energy boost because I need to get over the wall on some of these projects. So, boy, that'll do it for me. I'm feeling energized. Well, everybody, welcome. We're going to have a great show for you. We got the next hour with Jeff. Hey, Jeff, would you like to open up this show in prayer?
Sure. Dear Lord, dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this time together with Shannon and all the listeners. May you bring blessings and wisdom and help the discussion. Amen.
Amen. Jeff, for those that may be tuning in for the first time, give a little bio about yourself and tell us about your website, please.
My website is jrnyquist.blog. I was studying to get a PhD in political science, and I found that the socialism, communism, the whole culture complex at the university, I found myself sitting listening to Jacques Derrida lecture at my university. They took him on at UC Irvine, and I realized these people were dangerous. And so I started thinking it over, and I ended up writing books and realizing there were really dangerous things going on in the world, and among those dangerous things, it was socialism, which is the new religion. It's not, for most of these people, it's the religion of where man is his own savior through government power, and the little saviors are the activists. And of course, it's all driven by ideology, which is really a way that people have of lying to themselves about the meaning of life. And they make a meaning that's pretty meaningless. I had a drunken a Marxist, Colombian Marxist, telling me that it was all so sad because no one would remember him in 100 years, and that I was naive because I thought that the people who were good were rewarded in some way, and so that evil people were perfectly happy. And this was kind of some of the experiences I had. So I found it a revelation, actually.
That had to have been an interesting professor in school. Now,
I was a fellow graduate student, actually.
Was he Colombian, as in Colombian University, or actual Colombian?
Colombian nationality. He was from. I think he was from. Was he from Medellin?
Bogota.
I think he was from Medellin. Yeah.
What I want to know about him was he pro-FARC?
I think so. He never overtly said it. He said, "I hate Americans. I wish you would all die."
Oh,
he would say that. I remember he said it to a couple of undergraduate co-eds, and they had kind of shocked. They partly didn't know if he was serious, but he was, of course, serious. He hated Americans. He thought if the United States were destroyed, that his people would live a happy life.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So it would be called Gringo over in Medellin. And if he's Marxist, he probably was pro-guerrilla over there. Now, did I ever tell you I lived in Colombia for a while?
No, I didn't know that.
So I was married to a Colombian girl many years ago. Sadly, it didn't work out. And we were living in Costa Rica at the time, but God had told me to pack my bags and get out. Now, if you're married to a Colombian, you're not welcome in America. Very difficult to get them a visa because they think that they're all narco-traficantes. But I thought, well, where will I go? And then it came to me, I have to go back to Colombia. No problem there, but I don't want to get kidnapped by the FARC. This was about 2004. The FARC were still very active. Mm-hmm. So I settled on going to Cartagena, Colombia. Make a long story short, have you ever been to Cartagena?
No.
Okay, so basically it's an island connected to the mainland, and that's the main tourist destination over there for all Colombians. There's really only two great beaches, that or San Andreas, but Cartagena is pretty safe.
Mm-hmm.
because you don't want to disrupt the tourism industry. So there's a naval base there, and the Colombian government have active duty naval military stationed about every block across the city
Mm-hmm.
in their Green Army fatigues and with a 308 battle rifle. And it's a little bit intimidating to walk up past these guys, but then you
Mm-hmm.
realize they're there for your safety. And
Mm-hmm.
so the military controls that island of Cartagena. So if you go there as a gringo, you're okay. So I figured I should be all right, and I was. And I felt safe to walk out at night, but outside of there, it's all bets are off. They would have probably kidnapped me back then. I call it micro-napping. They'll grab you, take you up to the mountains, and hold you hostage for a minimum of $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
And if your family doesn't pay or they're poor, they'll just keep you there and then maybe cut off an ear and send it back as an incentive to get their money, maybe hold you forever. So thank the Lord, Omega Man wasn't kidnapped, or I wouldn't be here today. But I will say about Colombia, great food. Some of the best food you've ever had, and the people were super nice there.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to stay in Colombia, Jeff, but you can only get a visa for 6 months there, unless you qualify for something else, which I didn't. And so you have to leave, and you can't come back for 6 more months. So I ended up going to Panama to straighten it out. Didn't work out for me, and I ended up staying in Panama for 2 years. Loved it. So that's my story about Colombia. But I had a great experience with the Colombian people. But if you are Marxist, you're probably pro-guerrilla. And hey, I heard that do they have a Marxist president over there now again? Former.
Well, yeah. Well, basically, I mean, it depends. Former Marxists. What can you say? There's been an end to the Civil War, but it's not a good. It was never a good idea. You had. You're going to have the communists are taking over this country little by little, inch by inch. They
Yes.
couldn't take it by sheer guerrilla warfare. They're just, you go back to Pablo Escobar, whose intelligence advisor was supposedly a former DGI official from communist Cuba. I don't think
Wow.
he was a former DGI. I think he was. That's the Cuban KGB, by the way. And so I think what you've had is Colombia is a country like most countries in Latin America. You can't get enough people to explain anti-communism correctly. And so the communists, although there was a strong right wing and they committed their own atrocities, I suppose, but they were fighting hard against them. And Plan Colombia was undermined by some of the CIA people there. That's what I've heard. One of the CIA bosses there, who some of the people under him suspected him of working for the Russians, who the Russians, of course, want communists to come to power in every country in Latin America. That's what people don't understand about Russia. And of course, that's what's happening. You've got Lula in Brazil. And of course, you've got Daniel Ortega back in power for quite a few years now in Nicaragua.
Yes.
Except for Argentina, most of the countries in the continent are leaning towards China and Russia. They're part of Belt and Road. You look at Peru, the Chinese are building the biggest port in South America right now is the one that's attached to Sao Paulo. I forget what it's called, but they're building a bigger one in Peru. And a lot of Peruvians, even left-wing Peruvians, are worried that China's taking them over. There's been some appeals by the Chinese government for Trump to save them. But the United States just doesn't seem interested in saving these people from colonization by the Chinese and the Russians.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
not only in South America, Central America. In fact, speaking of Central America, yeah, they made their way over into Costa Rica even. When I was there I lived there for 3 years, off and on. The Chinese came in and they built a massive stadium, brand new stadium, there in San Jose, the capital. And I was told Costa Rica paid $1 for it, if you will. And the Chinese will come in, they'll put up these very tall blinders around the complex so you really can't see anything traveling by the road. They bring in their own people, and they just live there on site. After about 3 or 4 months, they raise this massive stadium. And I was told they got some kind of concessions to look for oil off of Costa Rica. I don't know if that's true. And then Mexico came in apparently, and they built this big highway there, and they didn't have one before, just these little small 2-lane roads. But they
Hmm.
put a toll system in there that would probably stay there for like 20 or 30 years. So, they were more than happy to take an infusion of cash from China even then. This was 2004 timeframe. But um, I'm not surprised about Central America, but then look at what's happening on this side of the world in Asia. The Spratly Islands, for
Hmm.
example, you know, they're raising up these artificial reefs, if you will, and then they claim it as part of sovereign China, put a warship out there. And so, yeah, if they could have their way, they'd probably like to rule the world, wouldn't they? You went mute. Check and
Sorry,
see.
yes,
Oh,
that's
there you
the
go.
idea for them to dominate the world, for their ideology and their people to be dominant. Look, the Chinese, their lending and they're building infrastructure all over Africa and Latin America is predatory.
Oh, wow.
It's very
Africa, too.
predatory. And with it comes the Chinese triads, which are organized crime groups that work very closely with the People's Liberation Army intelligence, People's Liberation Army, and the state security apparatus, the Chinese KGB. And so you've got somebody like Gustavo Petro in Colombia, and you know that he's got these relationships that are a bit opaque with Russia and China. You've got the same thing with Lula da Silva in Brazil. The only bright spot I say is Argentina with Milei, and uh,
Yes.
and he's very much against Russia and China. He says openly they're working together. He's amazingly one of the best informed leaders in the world as far as what Russia and China are up to, and he will not he will not make deals with him. He got Argentina out of BRICS.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Really?
he did, and
Okay.
I
I like
believe
Malay.
he converted to Judaism. I heard, but I don't know for sure.
Really? Oh, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Well, if anybody could turn Argentina around, it would take a guy like that. And I hope he survives long enough to be able to make some real inroads in Argentina in terms of politically. I mean, I don't know how long the term is over there. Is it 4 years or 5 years in Argentina? But
I don't know the presidential term. Some countries it's 5 years, some countries it's four.
yeah,
I don't know what it is in Argentina. Um, but it's, you know, General Laura Richardson, the commander of Southern Command 3 years ago, said that Russia and China were moving into Latin America to take it over, that we needed to do something. But nothing is being done. The Biden administration did nothing. The Trump administration is doing nothing. Venezuela is still under the communists.
right.
Uh, it's literally people talk about somehow we're doing bad things to Russia. Russia and China are surrounding the United States in its own hemisphere. And this encirclement is intentional. They want to control everything south of the Rio Grande, and they want to control Canada. Canada has been massively infiltrated by the Chinese. Um, there's been, look, the population of Canada has increased by about 30% over the last 15 years, and it's mostly Chinese and people from India, a lot of Sikhs. And these people, the Sikhs are pro-Chinese Indians. And
Oh,
of course,
really?
the Sikh community and the Hindu community are at odds in Canada. But this creates a
Interesting.
security problem because here you have Canada that had a population of 29 or 30 million people around the time Hong Kong became entered into this agreement where the British gave up Hong Kong. And suddenly
Yes.
pouring out through Hong Kong, you have all these Chinese. So then all of a sudden now we have 38 or 39 million population in Canada. So you've added another third to the population. So a quarter of the population is Asian, almost,
Amazing.
of either Chinese. And the Chinese influence is so big. I talked to a major conservative former member of parliament, who lost her seat not because of voting machines, but because the government brought in Chinese to be poll workers and to count the votes in her
Uh-oh.
and that's a suburb of Toronto she was elected in. So this is this is really alarming. And she said, tell your friends in America, this is when I was in Canada in September, tell them that Canada has been taken over by the Chinese.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah.
They've got their claws in Australia on this side of the world, and
And you have a
any.
communist prime minister in Australia, basically, you know, and the same thing in Canada. These people, they're on the left in a way that they've been cooperating with what is essentially the communist apparatus worldwide. And Vladimir Putin pretends to be a nationalist and pretends to be a Christian, but he's a leader of this apparatus. He's KGB. KGB is a sword and shield of the Communist Party.
Yes.
Vladimir Putin several years ago said, "I never just burned or threw out my party card. I kept it. I am." He said, and I didn't join the Communist Party because I had to, because I wanted to be in the KGB. I joined because I like socialist ideas. And he said that in a press conference. And the thing is, the KGB, you have to be a true believer because the KGB is actually the part of the Communist Party that carries guns for the party.
Wow.
They're the sword and shield. So that was who Putin is. And the idea that Putin has somehow changed, his colleagues would have murdered him if he had changed. And they wouldn't allow that country to. That's why there's a war in Ukraine. The Ukrainian SBU and generals turned against Moscow. They didn't want to be part of this communist Soviet Union redo, because really when they talked about a customs union, in 2012 or 2013, they were talking about re-Sovietization, which is what they're actually called it a year ago. November said we are re-Sovietizing. So it's back to the USSR, and that's why there's a war there, because they have to. The Ukrainians won't go back. They will fight to stay out.
I want to talk more about Russia in just a moment. But before we leave China, I want to ask you one more question or two about that. I've heard rumors that China doesn't have a population of 1 billion, but the true numbers may be only 300 or 400 million. What do you say to the population of China? Did a lot of people die off during the pandemic?
I don't, I'm surprised that someone would say 1 billion people died off. I would need to see hard evidence, but of
No, I
course,
mean to say
yeah.
1 billion population goes down to 300 or 400 million. Do you think they lost half of their people, in other words?
Well, let's do the math on that. They had, uh, they had the one-child policy,
Yes.
starting with sort of my generation, starting I think in the 1970s, after they had the starvation in the 60s, if I'm remembering correctly. And the one-child policy meant that you could only have one child. Now, in the countryside, they weren't keeping to that, and it's unclear how much it was able to be enforced throughout rural. Excuse me.
Rural
Throughout rural
areas.
China,
Yeah.
it's unclear how they could do that, because I've met Chinese who came from the south in a rural area, and they were like, well, they had 5 or 6 brothers and sisters.
Sure.
But it was in the urban areas, and I think if you have a one-child policy, and you have the other problem that the conditions in China were so bad that women didn't want to, with the starvation in the 1960s. I mean, the starvation was horrible. There was cannibalism in the countryside.
Wow.
When you had the Great Leap Forward, and then you had the Cultural Revolution, things were going very badly there, and so people didn't. The idea of people getting, this is like in all communist countries, the birth rate declines.
Yeah.
To one degree or another, because you have tremendous poverty, and what woman who's starving is in a physical condition to get pregnant or wants to, right?
Right.
You're starving. You're in difficult conditions. You don't know where food is. This happened in the Soviet Union during the Civil War. This is one of the reasons Stalin phased out abortion. Until 1934, they actually made a law, and it was only Khrushchev that brought it back. But Stalin realized they needed to have people. Now, after
Yes.
the whole system in Russia had been set, and it's still very Soviet there in terms of the way the welfare state works and the way the male-female relationship is derailed. The average woman in the latter days of the Soviet Union had 7 abortions.
Oh my goodness.
It's quite a bit. Now in China, we know there were a lot of abortions. We don't have figures on it. The Chinese system is very opaque. Supposedly, 20 years ago, there were over a billion Chinese, 1.3 billion. We've heard this
Right.
number. But it's funny. The bureaucracy in the Soviet Union and China, they always know what the bosses want and they lie. And a good example was 1937-38, the census in the Soviet Union. Stalin just suddenly ordered all the census people shot.
Oh my
He
goodness.
didn't say why. He just had them all shot. Of course, the reason is everyone could see that the census figure came 8 to 12 million short of what they thought the population was. So the next people guessed what the reason was, that the previous people were shot, and they just inflated the number of people in the Soviet Union.
Wow.
Um, but in China may have been the victim of something similar. I suspect that they overinflated the population numbers. And one of the reasons, all the
Yeah.
cities in China they built that there's nobody living in,
The ghost cities, right?
the ghost
Yeah.
cities. See, they had this tremendous building apparatus that was building all the time, that was building cities. And they thought all these people were coming from the countryside, but the countryside ran out of people to send them. And they had these empty cities sitting,
That's
stoplights and
amazing.
skyscrapers and coffee shops, nobody to inhabit this. And this is partly why their real estate's crashing, partly why they've got this malinvestment. Imagine if you build cities and there's no one there, how do you get your investment back? What you've done
Right.
is you've dumped real estate prices in the toilet. If you overbuild
S-
houses, right? By and of course it's because they had this socialist notion that their statistics were honest and they knew how many people there were, and apparently there weren't. Now I don't know that anyone surveyed the number of people they overbuilt by. That might give us a clue, but my guess it's in the order of hundreds of millions. A billion, I don't think so. People get it going too far in that. COVID, see, the reason for COVID, they're trying to kill off the old people. So the other thing that can make the population decrease rapidly is you have a one-child policy. So the
Yes.
people that are baby boomers, people born after the Second World War, they're starting to die off now in China, right? They're getting into their 70s, and this is when a lot of these people die. So all of a sudden, the biggest chunk of the population is over 60, and they have the highest death rate. And of course, what
Right.
does COVID do? It increases that death rate, especially when Chinese don't have a very good diet. They're low in vitamin D in their diet, and that makes them much more vulnerable to this. And then they were
I had
locking
heard.
people in their apartments and
Yeah.
starving them, and it was mostly older people they were doing this to.
That was horrific.
Yeah.
I'd heard primarily the numbers had been conflated and they just pumped up their population numbers. That could be a possibility.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
then,
I mean, they might only have 900 million, but I wouldn't think that they would be much less under 800 million, I would guess.
I'd
But
heard
that's
during the one
still,
child
yeah,
policy, if you could only have one child, it was a dishonor for your family if you didn't have a male child. So
that's why they had a lot of abortions.
kill the girl
Yep.
until you get the boy, and then if that's all you can have, I heard they were probably towards certain areas there were forced abortions, and so that's horrific because you look at places like Japan now,
Yes.
big aging population. You go out to the rural areas, they had to shut down some of the schools. There's no kids to go there anymore,
Yep.
and they say that nation could go extinct if people don't start having children. And the younger crowd, they say, well, look, I've got to get settled financially. I don't have the money to get married yet. A lot of people are not getting married, not having children. Is it true Russia had to even institute a program that they would pay you to have children because
Yes.
Putin was worried about
Yeah.
population?
Yeah. And Russia's not the only country to do that. Of course, it doesn't really succeed. The problem is that under socialism, there's two things going on in the world. The countries that are socialist have a massive decline in the birth rate because they're such miserable places to live.
Yes.
And it living under a system that lies all the time, falsifies and persecutes people for being honest, it doesn't make for good relationships between the sexes. You've got people who inform on each other. You've got people who are suffering a very bad psychological malaise.
Yes.
And then in the West, you have this hedonism in the West where people want stuff. They want to enjoy themselves. They have this extended childhood. They use drugs. They go for euphoric experiences. They party all the time. And they just don't want to be serious. And, being married is a difficult task. Having children is a very rewarding but difficult thing to do. And they look at that and they want to stay children themselves. So people don't have children. So there were always some men and women who, dedicated their lives to other things and didn't have children, but they were pretty much the exception. But now it's generally becoming the rule, both in the West and in the East, that people don't have children.
Right.
And it's different set of reasons. Some are similar reasons in both the West and the East. So it's the whole human race, except maybe the Muslims and maybe some of the Christians in Africa are
Right.
not reproducing. And of course, this is a very serious problem because human beings have an expiration date and we're supposed to be replaced. We're supposed to have children. That's part of the way God made us. And people aren't doing it. And by the way, this has
Yeah.
happened before. In ancient Greece, if you read Polybius, who was a Greek historian who wrote The Rise of the Roman Empire, um, he was a very highly educated Greek. And he said he's writing in the second century BC. He's writing 140 years before Christ. And he wrote, and suddenly there was a dearth of children in Greece.
Oh,
Why? Because people were living for themselves. They wanted to fulfill themselves. They got into this Greek philosophy. They became hedonistic. They realized that they could live on the legacies of their parents without having to worry. And so the Greek cities became depopulated. Later travelers described Greece as becoming a desert.
wow.
They couldn't raise an army. They needed the Romans to defend them because they couldn't defend themselves. So they became absorbed. The Romans were friendly towards them and defended them and ended up absorbing them. And a lot of these cities in like Athens filled up with Romans who wanted to learn Greek and study philosophy themselves. But it was
Good
there was
grief.
Gustav Le Bon once wrote that the modern Greeks are not descendants of the ancient Greeks. They're descendants of other peoples, primarily, I think he said, a Slavic people that a tribe that moved into there and adopted the ways. But the Greeks, except in Asia Minor, that's probably where only descendants of the Greeks remain.
Wow.
It was, if Gustav Le Bon is right, um, but it's quite a thing when people decide not to have kids, and that's what's happening here in America. Most of our population increase, it comes from the fact that it's so wonderful to live here. We've got a lot of immigration here, and the immigrants
Yes.
have more children than the natives.
That's going to be a problem, especially if they're militant groups. I run into all kinds of people here in Indonesia, and the average age to get married is in the 30s.
In Indonesia,
Yeah. Oh, I'm
among
sorry.
Indonesians
Here in Bali, rather. Let
in
me
Bali.
qualify that. No, this microcosm of Indonesia, Bali. Just about all the Indonesians I talk to, or even Jakarta. Are you married? No. Are you going to get married? I hope so. When did you get married? I was in my 30s. And then maybe they have one child. And I said, unless you and your wife have two, you're not even replacing yourself. You got to have three for the world to grow, right? So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, you're seeing a trend there. Well, moving on, I want to ask you this about China. They were feeling a little bit threatened with the tariffs that Trump was talking about slapping on them, and I heard the real estate market is collapsing. But what do you think's the real condition of China right now, economically? And do you think that they're just biding time before they attack America? Is that their ultimate goal?
Um, there's been a change of power. I think that there's been a change in China in power. I think Xi Jinping was not very smart. He brought in political cronies to run things. and particularly it backfired on him when it comes to the Air Force, the Navy, and the strategic rocket forces. And I think General Zhang is in control now. And I think
Oh,
they've got a troika there. And I think Xi Jinping is just a placeholder. His health isn't very good. He's over 70. Of course, I think Zhang might even be older, but Zhang is in good health. Um, and so it's a unique. We haven't seen a major communist country where the army actually took control of, and an army leader was in charge of the party apparatus, and or the whole state basically. I mean, the
right.
party has its leader. The Ministry of State Security has its leadership, and I think what is happening is we can see the intentions of China now are clear, whereas Xi Jinping was not able to make up his mind. He was the guy that couldn't make up his mind. He seems like he's going to be warlike, and then he backs away and he makes concessions, and he seems to be peaceful and then warlike.
Yes.
Zhang did something interesting now that he seems to be in full control, because we know this because key partisans in the Navy, Air Force, and strategic rocket forces have been arrested or purged, shall we say, from those jobs. So basically, Xi Jinping's um, satellites in those organizations are gone, and now they've been replaced. And I think Zhang is a master conspirator and intriguer who is really good at this power game. And he may be, I don't know how many more years he has, he may be represent something very solid and perhaps sinister, because Chinese Foreign Minister Yang went to Europe last week, and he told the German foreign minister and a bunch of EU diplomats that, or EU officials, he told them that China will not stand for Russia losing the war.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And this is what I've always known. This was the right choice for China. They need Russia as an ally. They need Russia to swallow Europe, and they need to, in order to push on America together, they need Russia to be strong. And Xi Jinping had expressed disappointment at Russia's lack of success in Ukraine. You know, he gave a speech allegedly a year ago saying Russia is not as strong as we thought it was. We were counting on Russia's strength, and it didn't pan out. Well, Russia intends to dig its way out of this. They are preparing to annex the Baltic states and confront NATO, and of course to finish off Ukraine. How they're going to do this is not exactly certain, but the Chinese are definitely putting their shoulder to the wheel. There are trains filled with armaments from China. China is not pretending anymore that they're not supporting Russia. See, China was under Xi was afraid of Western sanctions. Now they're
Right.
bold as can be. They're not afraid of anything we're going to do to them. They know it's all huff and puff. They've already had Trump back down over the tariffs now.
Right.
And so Trump is not going to hammer them. They know that the gateway is open. They're exploiting all these countries. They're taking over Brazil. They're taking over in Africa, along with the Russians, who are also taking over places. And
Right.
so, you know, I think Putin bragged recently that the Russian Empire will extend far into Africa, right?
Amazing. Now, speaking of Russia and the Ukraine situation, you mentioned that Russia's next move is to finish off Ukraine. Um, so are they planning to take the whole pie,
Oh
do you
yeah, well,
think?
Putin said at the what is the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, he said all of Ukraine is ours,
Wow.
and we're taking it all. He's not. That's why he would not settle for any agreement that didn't effectively cause Ukraine to ultimately surrender. I mean, Putin says you not only give me all of the provinces I partially occupy, but you have to
Right.
disarm basically and not receive any help from the West. And of course, after a couple of years and the demoralization that would follow, they would just march
Yes.
in and finish it off like Hitler did to the Czech rump state, right? No, all resistance would have collapsed. He would have accomplished it by an agreement, a Munich type agreement. And of course, the West is they they learned something from Munich in 1938. They're not going to do that again, and allow the second largest country in Europe to be swallowed by the largest country in Europe, because basically Europe disarmed after the Cold War, and it's going to take them about 7 to 10 years to rearm. and so they need Ukraine there as a blocking force to
You're
prevent Putin from occupying Europe.
so. Did I hear correctly that Trump made an announcement that we're not going to supply Ukraine with any more armagement? Is that
Well,
true, or are we
it's a
continuing
little
to send missiles?
technical. It's a little more technical. Hegseth, a guy named Colby who's I think policy planning at the Pentagon, said we need to check our ammunition and weapon stocks to make sure we have it, because it looks like we don't have enough for ourselves, and so
Oh,
they paused sending supplies to Ukraine.
okay.
Now, last week, Trump had a good conversation with Zelensky. Both Zelensky and Trump were happy about the conversation. He had a conversation that did not go so well with Putin. And then Trump had like a press conference, or a Ukrainian reporter talked to him about her husband at the front and the suffering. And Trump seemed genuinely moved, emotionally moved by that, and then said, we're going to support Ukraine.
Interesting.
And so he's saying something different from his Secretary of Defense. It's hard
Yeah.
to know how to read that.
Right.
But of course, the Russians have dickered with him, and he's said before that Putin is just giving me, the runaround, so to speak. Um, so
Now,
it's
since our
yeah.
last show that we did, I heard that Ukraine got some drones pretty far into Russia and even hit some of their ballistic aircraft that carried nukes. Is that true?
Yeah, the Ukrainians had an operation they'd been working on for almost 2 years. It involved infiltrating Russia. They used Russian stooges to drive these trucks to these locations,
Oh, yeah.
and then these things automatically deployed from these trucks, and these were drones.
Good
And
grief.
these drones were kamikaze drones, and they were deployed within close range, I think 12 miles, 12 kilometers of just outside the security zone of these strategic bases. And they
Yes.
came in and they hit these strategic bombers,
Yes.
uh, and they disabled a quarter to a third of the Russian strategic bomber forces. Now, these are bombers that are
Wow.
launching cruise missiles. They can normally launch hypersonic and cruise missiles. They can launch them on the United States. They're made to launch nuclear warheads. Bombers don't drop gravity bombs that much anymore. They fire these missile things.
Okay.
And this was a major blow to the Russian strategic air forces. It was an astonishing feat, and very much embarrassed the Russians.
So, how many more of these hits can Russia absorb? What do you think their next game plan is? Did they just do a major strike a few days ago, in fact, against Ukraine?
Well, it's very funny what the Russians are doing, and they've gone after power plants and some infrastructure, but they still haven't managed to collapse Ukraine doing that.
Right.
They are doing a terror attacks is their main tactic, because their weapons are not sufficiently precision like
Yeah.
ours. They have been sending waves of drones and cruise missiles into like Kiev, Sumy, and other Russian cities. They've lately been concentrating on those two for the last 4 months.
Okay.
These are like the Blitz in London, right? That the
Oh,
Germans did in World War
right.
II. They're wrecking things, and what they want to do is they want to make Ukraine uninhabitable. They want people to be so discouraged they'll leave and become refugees. They'll move to Europe, the U.S., somewhere else, anywhere else, because if they can get millions more people to leave the country might collapse because people just start abandoning it.
Okay.
So that's become a strategy that the Russians are pursuing. Just make life miserable for them, wear them down psychologically. Now that didn't work in World War II. It kind of worked when we nuked Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but the strategic bombing survey at the end of World War II showed that rather than destroying the morale of Germany in particular, or Japan, the idea that people get when you bomb civilians is that, and that's effectively what the United States and Britain were doing. When you bomb civilian areas, when you carpet bomb or whatever, the civilian population says these people are monsters that attack women and children, and they increase their effort for defense.
Yes.
So you actually raise the will of the people to defend, because you're convincing them that you're evil. And this is where when Putin said it's almost delusional that the Ukrainian people are Russians and there's some kind of, Zelensky's part of a Nazi clique that controls. I mean, it's just so ludicrous. It's so, Putin's feet don't touch the ground anymore. He's living in like Hitler was, in a fantasy world.
How is this thing going to play out? Is Ukraine going to lose in the end? Will Russia need to use nukes to end this war? How long do you think it'll take before this thing comes to a conclusion, one way or the other?
If Russia wants to win, nukes are the way to go.
Yeah.
And Russia's preparing. I think there's a number of things that, look, Lee Wheelbarger is a guy that's got a private intelligence gathering system on Russia, buying satellites and cameras and films and getting things out of the country and Belarus. And he's documented a massive buildup of Russia on the border of NATO. They're not as interested in finishing off Ukraine as they are, it seems, to go into the Baltic states and break up NATO.
What constitutes Baltic states? What are some of the countries
Latvia,
you're talking about?
Estonia, and Lithuania. These are three countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union. They are not Russians. They are Baltic peoples. The Estonians, for example, are closely ethnically related to the Finns. They've got a kind of a close fellow feeling with the Swedes. There was one time when the Swedish Empire ruled that area. They have some of them have fellow feeling with the Germans. In World War II, many of these people collaborated with the Germans in World War II because they hated the communists and the Russians so much. So these people, because of geography, it's very difficult for NATO to defend the Baltic states. They have smaller populations. They have very small militaries. Germany has committed to putting 10 brigades, of course, in not right away. It's going to take them years, into the Baltic states, so that Germany will be providing a large ground force that's going to effectively more than double the defense of that and make it defensible. But it's going to take a while. And the Russians now see Europe is rearming because Trump got them to commit to the 5%.
Oh, yeah.
That's 5% by 2035. So that's going to take a while. But the Russians see they've got a clock ticking. So there is, according to Wheelbarger, some of the Russian generals last month talked about 1 million man plus mobilization. According to Wheelbarger, that started in Russia. And they are mobilizing now 1 million men. An army bigger than the one they're fighting Ukraine with, to attack NATO. And what they want to do is if they can grab the Baltic states, they present a dilemma. It's an Article 5 situation where an attack on one is an attack on all. Okay. And then it's a test of NATO. And Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had said, we think NATO is not a viable alliance. It's just a hodgepodge of disparate countries that are not going to defend. And so we're going to challenge it. I mean, he said that publicly.
Yes.
So that means the Baltic states is perfect because they can pretty much invade and probably take over the Baltic states, and we really can't do anything about it. And then we'll see if NATO goes to war with Russia. If they just allow Russia to do it, Russia will eat up NATO one set of countries at a time. And of course, the new commander of the land forces of Russia, General Blood, he's nicknamed.
Wow.
He was famous for saying on Russian TV that this is going to be a long war because they have to go into Eastern Europe and liberate Eastern Europe from NATO.
Oh, boy.
So
now, what do you think?
Yeah.
How do you think it's going to pan out? As long as Trump is in power, you think they're going to have a hard time pulling that off, or are they going to test him?
Well, Trump has, because of the way Trump started out his presidency, where he questioned NATO and he questioned whether we should be in it. And he's got people like Hegseth who don't like NATO and other advisors who don't like NATO. The head of policy planning for the State Department, I think, what is his name? Michael Anthony, doesn't like NATO. As a consequence, there's been a question mark. A lot of Europeans are in panic because they think Trump might say, well, that's your war, that's your problem. We're not going to help you against Russia, we don't want to get in a nuclear war for you. That's up to you. So this is why the French president here a couple months back, uh, um, Macron said that France's nuclear deterrent will serve to cover Europe and NATO. And of course, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, wagged his finger and said, that's a mistake. The
Yes.
French have fairly interesting, I think they've got two to 300 nuclear warheads on ballistic missile submarines. France has I think about
Interesting.
8 ballistic missile submarines. We have I think 14 now, or we keep decommissioning them, so I can't keep track. Maybe it's only 12. But France has a significant ballistic missile fleet. Although it's not a sufficient number it may not be enough to deter Russia
Now,
from
do you
attacking.
think we have satellite technology to detect where all subs are? And they would, is there a way to take those subs out, or are those
No, you can't
pretty
track
independent?
submarines with radar. There's different sonar and other technologies for tracking them, but at the end of the Cold War, we pulled apart a lot of that stuff. Now the
Oh,
Canadians and maybe the Brits have more advanced sonar technology. So far, they're not sharing it with us. This was an issue within NORAD about the sharing of this technology because,
yes.
and I was told this by General Van Herk, the former commander of NORAD. He retired, I think, in August, and I met with him in September in Toronto because he spoke there. I also was part of a panel there, and I had dinner with him and some other generals. And what he said the Russians keep 4 submarines off the U.S. West Coast and 5 off the East Coast, and we can't hardly track them. We could go months at a time without knowing where they are. Our submarine tracking is just not up to what it should be at this time. And so this is a major concern because the Russians have developed a new long-range cruise missile that they can fire with a nuclear warhead from these submarines. And he said, I could try to shoot that down with a fighter plane, but it's not likely you can shoot down a cruise missile, one of these long-range cruise missiles with a fighter plane. So these cruise missiles get through, and then you've got the Russian hypersonics. That could be a hypersonic missile could be launched from the Russian Arctic, and it could reach and hit Milwaukee. That's their range. And the bomber that fires it is still over Russian territory when it fires it. So imagine if the bomber's over the North Pole, it can pretty much hit every American city. And he said there is no way to stop a Russian hypersonic missile. You can stop it only when it goes up, but once it goes down, you can't stop it. And if it's launched over the Arctic, we don't have any interception capacity over the Arctic right now. So our ABM systems and our lasers and whatever we have for shooting down missiles, we could stop an ABM. An ICBM that traditionally goes way up in outer space before it comes down, because that's way high up and it's exposed in its trajectory. But these things that go down and travel down below radar, they can't be stopped by our defense systems. And by the way, these cruise missiles and these hypersonics can change their direction of approach so that they could seem to be hitting to Milwaukee, but they're going to Detroit. You see what I'm saying?
Amazing. Yeah.
And this is a new thing, and this makes it very difficult to intercept and anticipate. And of course, NORAD has been sorely neglected. General Van Herk and his Canadian deputies tried to appeal to Toronto and Washington for more money for NORAD, but they couldn't squeeze a penny out of them.
Do you think the French, though, have the resolve to do the Samson option, if you will? I mean, if you were to say, look, you may get us with all your missiles, but I'm going to level the Louvre. I'm going to drop a nuke right on your granny's house. There's not going to be anything left of the French people except what you put in those submarines. That's it.
I sense a change in the French people in France. During the pandemic, the former head of the French Foreign Legion wrote a very shocking letter about the country and its direction. And although Macron has said stupid things and seems to align himself often with China, Macron is seeming to turn in this direction. A lot of the French generals, the traditionalist French Catholic conservatives, they seem to have gotten a sort of an upper hand, and the country is moving in a different direction. France
Yes.
is unlike Great Britain, the French are blocking Muslims from entering the country. They're defending their republic. They seem to have a different attitude. Now, maybe France is going back to Catholicism. We'll have to wait. It's going to take a decade or two to tell how serious this is. But I think France is undergoing a kind of change. And Macron is reflecting that change when he stands up for Europe and he performs this role that France has been in the past, which is to be the greatest power on the continent, right? And the French have some considerable capabilities if they would apply themselves. They have they have an aircraft carrier. They have these nuclear forces. Maybe France is waking up. It's hard to say at this point, but there's some good signs there.
Well, I've woken up, and I think many have, to the fact that they have went through some change, especially Macron's wife. I think that his wife is actually his uncle. Went through a sex change. Now, what do you think about that?
I don't think so. I haven't seen any evidence. I see that some people are convinced of that. I don't see how it's possible, to be honest.
I mean, it's bizarre, but
what makes you think that she's a man? When she was his teacher, she was a woman decades ago. She was his teacher when he was in.
So the official story is, yes, that was his music teacher, and she, I put in quotes, is 27, 30 years older than him. So at minimum, she was a predator to get with a 15-year-old. I mean, talk about a super cougar. Mm-hmm. But Candace Owens won't let the story die. She went and hooked up with a French researcher. And I saw the documentary. It's so, they scrutinize his history so much, they can't find this lady anywhere. They can't find any photos except of a young boy, which appears to be her as a young man. And there's some connections with the elite families who say incest is best.
So wait a minute, you mean literally she's his uncle?
So here it is in a nutshell.
Okay.
His wife is actually a man who had a sex change and who was born a boy with balls. Now, I don't know what the motivation was to go through the sex change, but apparently he went through the sex change and is a man biologically, but says that he is a woman, and now he's the wife of Macron and 30-year senior. I mean, that's bizarre. But I'm not surprised. There are people like that. Now, Trudeau, it said he was homosexual.
Yeah, I've heard that said about him, yeah.
And Barack Obama was gay.
I think that there was something about...
Larry Taylor in a limousine had sex with Obama. He said Chicago.
Larry
Sinclair.
Larry Sinclair, right.
Larry Sinclair, not Larry Taylor.
I've read that story. I've talked to people. There's a number of people who've said this about Obama, and I don't find it surprising. He was known in Hawaii by some people I talked to as Homo Barry, but
really,
that's what I was told. But you hear these stories. I mean, so does that make? I mean, if this is true, does that make Macron homosexual? And then Obama's homosexual? Then how many of our leaders are sexually abnormal, or I don't know what you'd call it.
What do we call that? Moral turpitude? I mean, so let's take it over to this Epstein scandal for a moment. Then I want to come back and have your thoughts on Iran.
Yes.
Okay, so out there, folks, that I voted for Trump twice, and I would have voted a third time, but I wasn't eligible to vote, not having a driver's license this time. Mm-hmm. I couldn't vote. But I still supported Trump all three times. And, I held out the hopes that this dream team, if you will, was going to be able to turn some things around. But I'm really let down now over the Epstein case. because I believe Epstein was running a honeypot. And Pam Bondi says, look, I've seen it. We've got thousands of videos with Epstein and children or Epstein in porn, hundreds of victims. We're sorting through it now. To heck with his Rolodex. Just that alone means Epstein Island was Pedo Island. Now, I did a short little YouTube video earlier today, and I said, let me tell you what's going on at Epstein Island. In a nutshell, it was a whorehouse for the elite. Now, those guys, whether they be princes or presidents or comedians or actors, whoever was over on that island, can't go down across the border of San Diego to Tijuana and go to the Adelita Bar, famous whorehouse. You won't see them flying to San Jose, Costa Rica, and going to the Blue Marlin Del Rey Bar where people go and pick up hookers, because they would be caught on camera and be outed. So the elite need a private playground, and it would be one thing if they were just going over there to get with women, adult women, okay? That would cause a scandal and, be a blight on their record, but that's not a crime per se. But when you have children, okay, now we're talking about something serious. So for them to say there's nothing to see here, irregardless of whether Epstein's alive or dead, or he hung himself, or somebody broke his neck and then arranged him in a noose, that's neither here nor there. What I want to know is, in a nutshell, why not one elite pedophile hasn't been prosecuted. Nobody's in jail except for Ghislaine Maxwell. How can we say that Epstein was not involved in any of this when Pam Bondi has said many times, I've seen it, it's horrible.
Yeah.
So was Elon right? Is Trump in the files? Why are they putting the kibosh to sweep this stuff under the rug? And Trump right there.
I mean, Jeffrey Epstein had not just Trump's personal phone number. He had like 40, 50 of Trump's numbers. He had the number of Trump's wife. He had the number of Trump's security people. He had Trump all over. He had all kinds of numbers for reaching Trump. I read this very differently because in the 1970s, Yuri Andropov was developing pedophile rings as a weapon.
Really?
To recruit Western leaders, yes. They were doing experiments with orgies in Komsomol camps and visiting Western social democrats in Crimea.
Wow.
They were developing this because it's if you get somebody and they believe in communism and they're helping your cause out and they commit a little bit of treason here and there, maybe they have a conscience and they'll go to the FBI or they'll go to their national security people and say, look, I didn't mean to betray my country. I was just a socialist idealist. And they had that happen. I mean, people like Whittaker Chambers and Elizabeth Bentley and Louis Boudin were all Communist Party members. Two of those people were part of spy rings in Washington, and they blew the whistle back in the late 40s, early 50s, which brought on, the House. It was a lot of it was exposed in the House Committee on Un-American Activities and the Senate Security Committee that famously Senator Joseph McCarthy ran towards the end of that committee's inquiries into communism. And so we know this pattern, but if you have people under a pedophile blackmail, they can't turn themselves in. And so it was very important to get key businessmen, Supreme Court justices, politicians, presidents, senators, congressmen, whoever you can get, billionaires, get them to this island and to have the two-way mirror. Now, look, there's interviews I have seen with some of the girls that worked for Epstein, and they've said, yeah, it was a blackmail operation. They knew it was.
Now, the Russians kind of pioneered that, didn't they? It's probably every secret agent is trained in seducing.
Yes,
men,
the Russians are
women.
very big on seduction. It's part of what they do.
Honeypots.
Yeah,
they probably pioneered, didn't they?
Yeah, well, the British did it.
What is a honeypot, by the way, for those that don't know the term?
No, it's a honey trap. Honey trap is when you lure somebody into sex, and like they're married already or whatever, and then you threaten to expose them to their wife or community as being, a philanderer or whatever. And so that it's a form of recruitment. Famously in Russia, they would do it to businessmen or Americans or foreigners coming there. And usually the girl, it would be a pretty Russian girl, someone who kind of looked like Marina Oswald, right? And
Right.
the girl would always have an Uncle Sasha. And, Uncle Sasha was either with the Interior Ministry Police or the KGB, supposedly, and he would kind of do the recruitment, right?
Yes.
After the event. This is very famous. But you see, with underage girls, and of course, this is famous going back to Roman times, the three favorite people used for spying were homosexuals, people involved in the occult, and Jews.
Really?
They were the ones that they wanted to use as spies. The aristocratic spy networks of the Middle Ages and the Roman Empire, that's who they used. And there's reason for that. Jews were a pariah people even in the pagan times in Rome because they were monotheists and the Romans were pagans. Later, when the Roman Empire became Christian and then Europe was Christian, the Jews were prized because they didn't accept Jesus Christ. So you use them, and they were vulnerable to being used, and they didn't have to follow the same laws as Christians. And homosexuals, because they live a sort of double life, because it was
Yes.
persecuted through most of history, homosexuals were persecuted. They live a double life. They were ideal spies because they already were studied in hiding who they were and deceiving people, right?
So this is a tactic used in modern times to gain information, to compromise people for blackmail. Now,
Well, now that homosexuality is more widely coming into being more widely accepted since the
yes,
1960s, it's not very good anymore. But pedophilia,
yes,
still sex with children, is still considered beyond the pale by
right,
most people. So you can't really blackmail people for homosexuality anymore because, all right, you out me out of the closet. If somebody's a
yeah.
homosexual, it might be a big deal for some people, but for most, it's just not a reliable way to blackmail somebody. But pedophilia, oh yeah.
Big
So
time.
they had to develop the sources of children, and this is where they've developed these sex clubs. They would attract young girls, orphans, young boys through S&M clubs or whatever, different kind of sex clubs. And these are kids that are already suffering from having been neglected as children, being orphans, and then they would exploit them. And
Yes.
this is what Jeffrey Epstein did. It was a very high-end operation with Epstein. And of course, he had the cameras. I have no doubt he had the cameras.
Sure he
And
did.
and who was Epstein working for? Okay, he was working for the Russians, not the Israelis. It's nice to say he's Jewish and it's Mossad, but Israel. I mean, Putin just joked recently that, well, there's 2 million Russians that live in Israel. It's our colony anyway.
Oh my
You know,
goodness.
yeah, he said that. I mean, so so
What
the
about
fact of the matter is that
FBI?
huh?
There's been an allegation that Epstein became an FBI informant uh, back in the 90s. Do you think also the FBI has been well aware of what he's been doing for some time and could be
Well,
implicated?
this is a way to compromise the FBI. Oh, the KGB is very ingenious.
Okay.
Look, let's say you're an FBI guy and you know that Epstein is doing this pedophile thing, and
Yes.
you decide to let it go on to get information for yourself,
Yes.
right? Well, you're complicit. You've just
Right.
now you're blackmailable, right? In everyone's eyes, you're a bad guy.
Could
So
that be
this
a
is
reason why they're saying there's nothing to see here when it was clear that uh, they inherited all this when Biden left? There's another theory that there was a sanitization process. So truly Patel could and Bongino could say, hey, plausible deniability. We didn't have anything given to us that
Well, I don't
demonstrated.
know. Yeah, we don't know what the Biden administration Justice Department did with all the evidence. We don't know how much
Right.
is left, and we don't know what kind of pressure is being exerted. Look, if they found evidence against the president or other
Mm,
people in the administration, they'd bring down their own government. and they'd be kicked out on their butts themselves.
True.
That's always a dilemma. It's hard for people to be honest. Plus, there's death threats, threats to people's families. Remember, the KGB is the most ruthless, most powerful, together with the GRU, intelligence service on the planet. There's nobody that can match them. And that's partly the evidence that this is GRU KGB. And the other evidence is Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine
Okay.
Maxwell's father was Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell very famously came to this country in the last days of the Soviet Union, and he set up hundreds, if not over 1,000 front companies to siphon Communist Party money and KGB funds into this country.
Wow.
And he did that. He was a KGB agent. There was some, I read it years ago. There was some loose talk from some KGB people about how, well, he was theirs. Now, he fell off of a yacht shortly after the end of the Cold War.
Right.
There's been allegations that he wasn't, once the Soviet Union collapsed, he kind of wanted to get out of his contract and they wouldn't let him, and that everything was transferred over to George Soros. But, I can't confirm any of that. The thing is that these people are very murky and they're
Yes.
supporting communist causes. And, we know that Ghislaine Maxwell's father was doing all these things for Moscow when Gorbachev was
Okay.
in. What are the odds, since Andropov set up Gorbachev in his place? And Gorbachev was the one that basically was using Maxwell here. What are the odds that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell weren't operating a pedophile ring for Moscow for the KGB? I think
I
that's
think
who they
that's
were working for. Yeah.
I think that's the most probable explanation. Now, speaking of these honey, what now you call them? It's not a honey pot, but a honey.
Honey trap.
Okay. Uh, the Chinese use the same playbook. Have we forgotten that Feng,
Sure.
the
Well,
agent, was sent in and seduced Swalwell?
oh, yeah, of course. Well, look, there was famous case of this Chinese national who became an American who was a major Republican organizer on the West Coast. I forget her name now.
Yes.
She basically had a clever lawyer get her off, but she seduced some head of a lab. Was it Sandia? It was the one in New Mexico, or I forget which
Right.
lab it was. She seduced him, and she seduced an FBI guy that was supposed to be watching her.
So Swalwell was boning a Chinese agent. And then what about Dianne Feinstein's driver, who for over a decade had been driving her and turned out to be a Chinese agent as well?
The Chinese are all these people from San Francisco, the governor of
Yeah.
California, Nancy Pelosi, Dianne
Right.
Feinstein, all these people from San Francisco has become a Chinese colony. The
It's
Chinese
true.
are all over that place. I mean,
I,
in Los Angeles to a lesser degree, and the Russians are there too. But the Chinese really have a powerful influence hold on California. I mean, California may become part of China in the future. We got to be pretty careful because if
my
they
point.
invaded, they could take it. And there's a
Yes.
huge desert between the West Coast and the Rocky Mountains, and that desert is hard to cross if you've got a lot of weapons.
I
You
think
know,
we have long been infiltrated by Chinese and Russian spies. I think that they were doing that operation there, and they got a lot of people on tape. I mean, Prince Andrew, one of them. You don't pay off somebody if you're innocent. So, but here's the deal. I can no longer trust anyone in government now. That was the straw for me that broke the camel's back. I had held out hope that these people were going to follow through with their promises. And, now Trump, he's like a double-minded man in the Bible, unstable in all his ways.
hmm
The tariffs on, the tariffs off, the tariffs on, tariffs off. I
Yeah.
don't know where he's at. Why hasn't Fort Knox been audited?
Well, there's another question. Why, now that he twisted the arm of the Ukrainians to make peace, but when Putin is a complete jerk about the whole thing,
Yeah.
he'll actually lift sanctions on Russian banks and companies. You know, going back to the Epstein thing, do they have a hold over him? And is Elon Musk, by saying that, reminding Trump of the Russian hold? Because Alexander
Yeah.
Dugin, the Russian propagandist and KGB agent, basically wrote in his yesterday's his Substack, wrote that Elon Musk and Peter Thiel are fighting the globalists and are on the good guys' side, and maybe they'll bring Trump back over. So, has Elon Musk been leveraged by the Russians and Chinese? Is he then warning by talking about Jeffrey Epstein? Is he basically warning Trump, you better not do anything against Russia, you better not have those tariffs on
Wow.
China? Is this how they're constraining Trump? I don't know, but I have a strong suspicion.
Man, I tell you, uh, and the midterms are going to be coming up. This is going to really hurt the Republican Party because there's a lot of MAGA. I'm not saying that I am a MAGA, but I guess maybe I am. I voted for him 3 times. Um,
Yeah, I
they're
voted
not
for him
happy with
three
this.
times too. I'm not going to vote for the communists like Harris or Biden.
No, oh, absolutely not. But I just may be voting for Jesus Christ next time and just say, well, I guess this was meant to end this way anyway. It's going by the book. Um, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about Iran. We've got 19 minutes. Is that good for you?
Yeah, sure.
Uh, so, 3 nuclear enrichment sites apparently taken out.
Hmm.
What's the true story there? Um, does Iran have warheads? And also, I want to get you to comment on these planes that were coming in from China. Some were wondering if China was sending warheads, or maybe North Korea sent warheads, and they've had the capability for a very long time, Iran, to hit targets. Now that they've got the Shabab 3 missiles. So, what do you think actually happened with those 3 enrichment sites? Did we get it all?
Well, I don't think so. I think the uranium was moved off those sites. I think it was 400 grams of uranium. Was it kilograms of uranium? I forget. Anyway, it was a large amount of uranium that was given more than 20 years ago by Lula da Silva in Brazil
Oh,
to
really?
Iran, and that's what I've heard, that Iran got the uranium from Brazil. And I supposedly that uranium was enriched to 90%, and it's enough uranium. If I'm here, it's late. I'm getting tired. It's enough uranium to make about 20 nuclear weapons. If you want to
Amazing.
make smaller ones, you maybe make 30 out of it. Um, so the they should have enough enriched uranium to have already made bombs.
Right.
But if for any reason they haven't made the bombs, uh, Lee Wheelbarger believes the Russians have given them bombs, and maybe the
Okay.
Chinese are too, because in March of this year, the Russian aircraft that are used to move nuclear warheads around inside of Russia landed in Iran, and on April 6th there was an underground nuclear test, uh, what you'd call an atypical earthquake.
Of this year?
Um, Yes, in April 6th
Wow.
of this year. So, and this may be why Netanyahu went and attacked Iran, is that they had detected an underground nuclear test, that
Okay.
Iran had the bomb. And I think the Russians maybe give them the bomb to test it, to set the Israelis on the course, because I think Russia needed this Middle East diversion.
Really?
And yeah,
That's
because
interesting.
because now, we diverted all kinds of resources have been diverted from Ukraine to going to Israel now.
Yes.
And that really helped the Russians. So this happened before with October 7th. Remember when October 7th happened, the Hamas terrorist attack, supplies were immediately diverted to Israel when the battle around Gaza started. And we said, well, Israel's the important ally, Ukraine is not. Actually, strategically, Israel is not important to the United States. If Israel fell tomorrow, it wouldn't change the U.S. strategic position at all. In
Now let
fact,
me be clear.
it might improve it. But
I am
yeah.
I am pro-Israel.
Hmm.
I stand with them unconditionally their right to all the land.
Yes.
But I have to ask myself this question:
Yeah.
Did did Netanyahu give the order to the IDF to stand down? Um, how is it that they could have been hit? I
On
mean, when
October 7th? Well,
yeah,
it's
October
easy
7th.
because, look, it's surprise attack. Look, you can't defend. How can you defend against these crazy people? Look, Putin
They're
gave
crazy. Yeah.
Hamas $100 million of his own personal money for
Really?
that operation.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. And why did Putin give his own money for the operation? He gave his own money for the operation that he needed the diversion. He needed the West to be
Okay.
diverted to the Middle East away from supporting Ukraine because Ukraine is the main battle. If Ukraine falls, Russia can get Europe and the West may fall. Because
Yes.
once they take over Europe, America might not be able to defend itself because of its economic dependence on Europe, partial, and on Japan. Japan, if we lost Europe, we would lose the Middle East. We wouldn't be able to hold the Middle East without help from the Europeans. And so then Japan would be forced to make a separate peace with China and Russia. So then we'd be all alone because we certainly don't have friends in this hemisphere, right? Mexico and Canada aren't really friendly countries anymore, and
Oh
Cuba
no.
certainly isn't. So the
I
three
saw
closest friends,
footage
yeah. What?
just today. I saw footage today in Mexico City. Mobs of people targeting Americans over there and foreigners,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
smashing their restaurants, you know, trying to
yeah,
break into their apartments. The only reason I said that about Israel was this. Now again, I support them 100%. However, I just thought it was strange because Israel is surrounded by enemies. They have to have pilots sitting in aircraft because you don't have much time to respond if
yeah.
there's a threat. I mean, they're masters of surveillance, cutting edge technology. How could you have this infiltration by guys coming in on paragliders unless they were just, not paying attention that day? I think it was a holiday, but
Yeah.
I would fire some people for not being more alert at minimum.
Well, and
Um,
Netanyahu was embarrassed, and his
yeah,
political credibility went down because of it. And of course,
yeah,
this raid on Iran, in a way, kind of restored Netanyahu's credibility with
yeah.
the Israeli people. And of course, Israel is in a difficult position because it's surrounded by enemies. And
Yes, they
now
are.
you have the Egyptians because of the Gaza thing. They basically gone against the Camp David Accords. They've moved troops into the Sinai. So there may be trouble brewing between Israel and Egypt again for the first time in, gosh, 50 years, more than
Right,
50 years.
right.
So it's a very volatile region, and Israel is a small country that's extremely vulnerable. And there are
Yes, they are.
people that suffered this persecution in World War II,
Yeah.
and they say never again, and they can face annihilation. And
They have a right to defend themselves and to all the land that God gave them. I support Israel. Job well done over there, but I will say this. I do not believe that America got it all. I think that you're right. They probably had relocated this stuff, and we haven't seen the last of Iran. In fact, I was surprised. I thought for sure Trump would have come back and said, "Oh well, we've been able to work it out. We're not going to have to strike them." So I was really amazed that he gave the order to do that. And I'm glad that he did, but um, Iran is going to hit us at a time of their
yeah, they have sleeper cells here,
liking.
and as far as I know, they could have 1,000, 2,000 terrorists here in this country.
Right?
They want to kill President Trump because of the assassination of Soleimani, which, I have to deplore that because you don't assassinate a uniformed general going to a parley. That was an awful thing for us to do.
Wow.
I believe in being chivalrous. I believe in being, even if your enemy is not, you should be good. You should follow the rules of war. Uh, you know, um, Never fight with poison weapons. Never do use treachery. Never attack an enemy going to a negotiation. I mean, it's just
Well, right. I
it's
agree
just
with you
it's
on that.
just appalling. I mean, he's going and he's meeting with the president of Iraq, who's our ally, to a parley, and we kill him at the airport going to the meeting with a drone. I mean,
My
that's just
goodness.
foul. I'm sorry, it's foul.
You're right. I have to
Yeah,
agree with you on
in,
that.
in anyone's book.
Um,
And so the Iranians have a reason to be mad, and for then Trump to brag about it, and I killed him. And then, this is the problem with Trump, is that he doesn't have a moral compass. This is a serious problem.
he's not born again.
Yeah. Well,
You'll know
I
them
I
by their
mean,
fruits.
I
I
I
don't believe
voted
he's
him.
saved.
Yeah, I voted for him for three times because he was the lesser of two evils, but they
Right.
were pretty bad evils, right?
Yeah, they were. They were. And, I would vote for him again if I had to do over again. But really, this Epstein thing is my line in the sand. They have betrayed my trust. I think that none of these people have the integrity that I expected that they would.
No.
And whatever their motives are, we'll
Yeah.
never know. Um, I don't think we're going to see anybody go to jail that's part of that pedophile elite ring. Um, we're live with Jeffrey Nyquist. Jeff, We got about 10 minutes left. I want to take a commercial break and ask you right now, tell people about your blog and your books and how they can follow your work.
Yeah, my blog is jrnyquist.blog, jrnyquist.blog. There's hundreds of articles there you can read and videos you can watch. And of course, I try to produce something new every week. I do videos every week. I do or radio or podcasts every week and articles. And I footnote everything so people can look it up and see that I'm not making it up. And of course, at Amazon, I have books. The Fool and His Enemy is my favorite one if you want to have a little fast, quick read.
Oh,
And of course, The Lies We Believe In is another one. And but people don't read that much. But the site has videos. Please support the site. It helps me continue the work. The problem that is that we live in an age of where the presentation and the money and the ideology, which is not honest, becomes everything. But it's like the truth is not really happy news for anyone. It doesn't conform to our expectations. The truth is not going to flatter us. The truth is not going to tell us that our heroes are really heroes. It's going to tell us some difficult truths, right? The truth is going to be difficult.
Jeff, we have a listener from New Zealand. Alex, he says, I wanted to let your listeners know about the grand solar minimum. Keep an eye on the food prices. He said here in New Zealand, butter is now selling at $20 to $30 New Zealand dollars, along with premium prices for minced beef. You mean $20, $30 for some butter? That's crazy.
Well, let me tell you, this grand solar minimum, I interviewed
Thank you, Alex.
one of the chief scientists, solar scientists here, Zarkova. What's her first name? And she went through the whole science of the sun. The 25th solar cycle began with the sun is basically going into solar hibernation. It's something that happens every 205 to 210 years. And it means the sun puts out less energy, but more important, the sun's electromagnetic field collapses or partially collapses. That allows muons to hit the earth, to reach the oceans and create more clouds, which means more floods and more rains. Some areas will get less because of the whole pattern of the jet stream is going to change. But the other thing, it's going to, more cloud cover means global cooling, because a cloudy day is cooler than a sunny day. So you're going to have a general cooling effect, and more clouds reflect more light back out into space, in addition to the sun's heat not being as great. So we're going into this cooling, and what's kept us warm through this 25th solar cycle is the fact that the oceans have been a reservoir of heat. They've absorbed a lot of the heat of the last 3 decades where the sun has been very strong. Global warming isn't a function of our use of our carbon emissions. The planet Mars and the planet Venus and Mercury have been hotter too because the sun's been putting out more heat. It's not our doing. We're just a speck on this globe. And so what's happening is as the heat is being exhausted from the oceans, that's keeping us warm. As this is happening, we had a pretty cold winter here in North America last year, but now the winter in the Southern Hemisphere, remember the Southern Hemisphere is colder generally because of the Antarctic. There's all that ice down there. There's a lot more ice in the Antarctic than in the Arctic. And so it's what's happening now is in southern Brazil, I don't know if you noticed, they had in the 3 southern provinces of Brazil, they had 30 degrees below centigrade temperatures.
Wow.
In the first week of winter.
I didn't know that.
Yes. And of course, they're calling it Siberia in Brazil. Rio had -8 degrees centigrade. And Sao Paulo had -5 degrees centigrade. It was snowing in the Amazon.
Good grief.
I think this past week. Someone down there was telling me. And
Holy
sent
cow.
me the headline. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about snow in the tropics now. So, and of course, the southern hemisphere is colder than the northern hemisphere naturally, but this is really happening, and there's solar phenomenon that you can see with the naked eye. That is, the sun looks different. And I've had people in the southern hemisphere send me the pictures of some of this in the equatorial regions. And So it's this grand solar minimum is serious, and what it means is the food growing in the southern hemisphere is already going to be a lot less food than they thought. Look, they had last year they had China was buying all this grain from Brazil, and there was these massive floods, and the grain had been stacked up along this river, and it was all washed out to sea. You've
Yes.
had all kinds of these problems, and of course, you're going to have this summer in the northern hemisphere. You're going to start to see some changes. You're going to probably have an early start to winter this year in the northern hemisphere and a harsher winter. But this is going to be nothing compared to what we're going to have 3, 4 years down the line. Because remember, we're still in the middle of the 25th solar cycle. You know, it's an 11-year cycle. We're on year 5 of that cycle, you know, because it began in 2020. So year 5 is the middle of an 11, you know, the sun cycle is an 11-year average. It varies. Cycle 5 years is in the middle. So we're still in the hottest part. See, what happens is it's generally colder at the end of the cycle and the beginning of the
Yes.
next one. But in the middle is when the sun is strongest. If this is how cold it's getting, when the sun's in the middle of its cycle, in
Right.
3 years, when the sun is starting, that cycle is winding down, the sun's going to get really cold because that electromagnetic field drops more, the sun's intensity goes down. We're by 2030, we're going to be in a crisis. And the food problem, let us hope that China only has 340 million people
Right.
because and let us hope that the population is declining everywhere because pretty soon we can't feed 8 billion people. In fact, it's been estimated that maybe we can feed 5 billion people when we get into this grand solar minimum. And this
It
may
may
be
be.
why this war in Ukraine is so important, because Ukraine is the richest farmland in Europe.
Yes, it is. Now, we only have about 3 minutes, but let me ask you this bonus question. Is the real target of China to take America for its land breadbasket? Is that really what they'd like to do? Replace the American population with their own people so they can feed their country?
Yeah, well, General Chiao Chen 20 years ago said that their objective was to exterminate the Americans and build a second China here and move a large portion of the Chinese population here to North America.
There we go. Now, um, last time we were on the show, you were working on a new project, a study of the UFO phenomena. How are you coming along on that?
It's slow, but I am making progress. It's very surprising, and it's quite a puzzle what's going on with this. Um, the government is hiding something. What it is unclear. There seems to be something non-human. Doesn't mean that it's from another planet, but something that's non-human, that's an intelligence that has capabilities that are quite frightening, and it interacts and manipulates human beings. And it is we don't know what its intentions are or what it does or why.
When you're ready to talk about it and do a program, let's do it. Also, I have a guy you might want to interview for your research. Are you familiar with the name Bart Sabrell? Something funny happened on the way to the moon?
No, I haven't heard of him. Is he one of the people that says we didn't go to the moon, or?
He is. He's the
Yeah.
grandfather of it all.
Oh, yes.
But
No, I know who he is. Yes, I know who he is.
I can put you in contact with him if you would like to
I don't believe a word
interview
he
him.
says. I don't
Okay.
have any credit. My dad worked with NASA in the late '60s. I don't
You're
believe a
the
word of
guy.
it.
Some years ago somebody told me they had a father with NASA. That was you. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, my dad
Oh,
knew all the astronauts. No, it's nonsense
amazing.
that we didn't go to the moon. It's just total nonsense. Look, India, Japan, and China and Russia have had probes fly over the moon where they could see our landing sites. And there's pictures of where they landed. You could see the tracks of the rovers. You could see where they landed. All the stuff that we left up there is still there. There's no weather on the moon, so everything's perfectly preserved there. And if the Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, the Japanese could see it, they would say, "Look, you never landed on the moon. There's nothing there." They would have been blown. Are you telling me the conspiracy is so big that even our enemies are in on it? I mean, that's just too much. I don't accept it. And
We
besides,
got to
my
talk
dad,
about that.
my dad knew these people. My dad did all the on the ground filming of the astronauts when they were training and when they came back and were in quarantine. He was responsible for uh, for basically documenting on film everything the astronauts did, the Apollo astronauts did. So it's just nonsense. I remember a kid in school when one of the Apollo missions went up, and this is in junior high school, saying, "We didn't really go on the moon, it's fake." And my dad that very day came home from Houston Control, and I said, "Dad, this kid said that we faked the moon landing," and he just laughed and said, "Well, then I would have been the one to fake it." But my dad, who died a
Wow.
couple of years ago, he just thought it was funny that people thought that way.
I want to talk more about that subject in a future program. Your website again?
jrnyquist.blog.
Jeff, thank you for coming on, my friend. I want to get you on next month, and I'm going to an AM schedule, Sunday through Friday, 9 a.m. till noon Eastern. So we'll get you on in a morning slot next month if you're available.
Oh, sure. Love to do it.
Thank you, brother. God bless you.
Thank you.
Folks, J.R. Nyquist. Thank you, Jeff, for coming on tonight. Coming up next, Terry L. Cook,